Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining today's webinar, the Cybersecurity for Retirement Plans. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I did mute everybody, and I'm not hearing any background noise, so that's fantastic. So thank you. This is also being recorded, so if you want to reach out after the fact, we will put it on the website, of course, and we'll let everybody know when it's ready to be viewed. But if you do want to see it or want a link to it, you can always reach out to your relationship manager too, and we can always get you that link when it's available. I'm about to introduce the two speakers today. So we're going to be presented by Dana Turner and John Nownes. Dana is our the network security officer here at UBT. And of course, John is an ERISA attorney, vice president, and relationship manager here at UBT. And so with that, I'm just going to hand it over to John and let him start the presentation today.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning and welcome to our Cybersecurity for Retirement Plans webinar. I want to thank Jason for his technical assistance for making this happen, as well as Dana for making himself available to help me present this material to you. Before we talk about the agenda for this morning, I want to take a couple of minutes and explain why this topic is so important and why it's so timely. First of all, this is a fiduciary issue. ERISA was passed into law almost 50 years ago, and ERISA is the federal law that governs employee retirement plans. And while ERISA has been around for almost 50 years, the issue of cybersecurity is really a relatively recent issue, but nonetheless, it's already become well settled that cybersecurity is a fiduciary issue. It's a fiduciary issue because employers and other plan fiduciaries are required to operate a retirement plan, such as a 401k plan, in a prudent manner. And in order to operate a retirement plan in a prudent manner, the employer and other fiduciaries are required to safeguard participant retirement benefits as well as participant personal information. The second reason why this topic is so important and timely is that there has been a dramatic increase in cybersecurity attacks on retirement plans in the last handful of years. To put a finer point on this, I've included some statistics here. According to the Investment Company Institute, as of September 30th of 2021, there were about 600,000 401k plans with approximately 60 million active participants and millions more participants who were former employees who have left their money in their former employer's 401k plan. Add to that, there's about $6.6 trillion in IRAs that were actually rolled over to IRAs from 401k plans. So the reason why there's been a significant increase in cybersecurity attacks on retirement plans, well, it's simple, that there's a whole lot of individuals that hold much of their wealth inside 401k plans. So with that, what we're going to talk about is what the Department of Labor has done in this arena of cybersecurity. We're going to talk about what the Department of Labor is doing today, and we're going to talk about where we think the Department of Labor is going on this issue. We're also going to give you some tips on preparing for a cybersecurity audit. And then Dana is going to close our program with a discussion of Union Bank's cybersecurity program. You're welcome to ask any questions at the end of the program. If you're more comfortable with asking questions offline, you can certainly contact me at any time. I forgot to include my contact information on the last slide, but feel free to email me at any time at john.nownes@ubt.com, and the last name is spelled Nownes, and I'll answer your question, or if I have to pass it on to somebody else, I'll do that. So we've also attached documents for your use and review after the program. In addition to this presentation, We have attached 3 pieces of the Department of Labor's informal cybersecurity guidance, as well as Union Bank Information Security Overview, and finally Union Bank's Recovery Plan Summary. So first, just really briefly, because this is really the backdrop for everything of what we're going to be talking about today, and that is that the Department of Labor issued informal cybersecurity guidance in April of last year. So there were 3 pieces of guidance. The first, tips for hiring a service provider with strong cybersecurity practices. The second piece of guidance, cybersecurity program best practices. And then the third piece we're going to talk about is the guidance, the online security tips. But we're going to get to that a little bit later. So this is what the Department of Labor has done. Next, where do we think the Department of Labor is going? And we expect that the Department of Labor will follow up this informal guidance with more formal guidance, perhaps in the form of proposed regulations. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Department of Labor's formal guidance borrows heavily from the SEC proposed cybersecurity regulations that were issued in February. And so we're not going to cover the SEC proposed regulations in a whole lot of detail, but I do think it's worthwhile to take a quick look at the SEC proposed regulations and give you a flavor of what the SEC is doing with respect to investment advisors and investment companies, that is mutual funds, because I do think it's likely that the Department of Labor will use these proposed regulations as a starting point in developing its own formal guidance, whether it's in the form of proposed regulations or not. So what the SEC is requiring of investment advisors is that they implement and develop cybersecurity policies and procedures to address the cybersecurity risks that are inherent in the investment advisor's business. And the rationale for issuing these SEC proposed regulations is that the SEC properly notes that an investment advisor has a fiduciary duty of care and a fiduciary duty of loyalty toward their investment clients. And if this sounds familiar, it should, because employers and other planned fiduciaries have these exact same fiduciary duties of care, of prudence, and of loyalty. And that's why I think it's likely that the Department of Labor is really going to look at these SEC proposed regulations when it starts to fashion its own formal guidance. So advisors need to take steps to minimize the cybersecurity risks inherent in their business as part of their fiduciary obligations. And that's why, again, that I think that the Department of Labor is going to borrow from those regulations. So let's just take a look at a broad overview of the SEC's regulations. Again, it's not really clear what the Department of Labor is going to do with this. Are they going to regulate employers a little differently than planned fiduciaries and service providers like Union Bank? We'll have to wait and see. But the 4 real main areas of the SEC proposed regulations is that not only does the advisor need to adopt policies and procedures to address cybersecurity risks, but they also must revisit those policy and procedures at least annually, review and evaluate the design and effectiveness of those cybersecurity policies and procedures. And the SEC provides specific elements that should be in those cybersecurity procedures to address risks and factors that could lead to unauthorized access or use of personal identification. For example, the SEC wants cybersecurity policies and procedures to take a look at risk assessment. The investment advisor must understand the cybersecurity risks in his or her business. Those procedures need to discuss how user security is managed and how access to personal information is managed, and require investment advisors to periodically assess their information systems and the information on those systems. And then the policy procedures need to have measures that are designed to detect, respond to, and recover from cybersecurity incidents. And you'll see a lot of these same themes popping up when we discuss the Department of Labor's informal guidance and also what the Department of Labor is doing these days. Also, the SEC regulations have a reporting component to them in that any significant cybersecurity incident on an investment advisor's behalf must be reported to the SEC. So the question is, okay, well, what is a significant cybersecurity incident? Well, an incident is significant under the SEC's proposed regulations if it significantly disrupts the advisor's ability to maintain critical operations, or there has been an unauthorized use of information that results in substantial harm to the investor client. And if there's a significant cybersecurity incident, then that's going to need to be reported to the SEC. There's also a disclosure requirement in the SEC proposed regulations, and whereas the reporting requirement really addresses something that happens after a cybersecurity incident, the disclosure requirement is an upfront requirement where the investment advisors are going to need to describe the cybersecurity risks that could materially affect the way advisory services are offered, how those cybersecurity risks are assessed, prioritized, and addressed, and that's an upfront disclosure requirement to the SEC. And then finally, investment advisors have new record keeping, or will have new record keeping requirements, in that not only are they going to have to keep a copy of the cybersecurity policies and procedures, but they're going to have documentation of the annual review that they conduct of those cybersecurity policies and procedures. And they're going to have to keep records relating to any cybersecurity incident, any records relating to how the investment advisor responded to the cybersecurity incident and recovered from such incident. And then finally, there's going to be retention of records documenting the advisor's cybersecurity risk assessment. So those at a very high level, what the SEC is doing. Again, we don't know what the Department of Labor is going to do. We're pretty certain. I mean, we know that the Department of Labor is going to follow up its informal guidance with formal guidance, and I do think it's instructive to look and see what the SEC is doing with investment advisors. So with where we think the Department of Labor is headed, let's talk about what the Department of Labor has done. As I said, last April, the Department of Labor issued 3 pieces of informal cybersecurity guidance. The first piece of guidance that we're going to talk about is their tips for hiring a service provider. Now, I'm not going to go through in a whole lot of detail what this guidance or the next couple of pieces of guidance we're going to talk about, but I do want to hit on the highlights of the guidance and let you know again that we have attached the 3 pieces of Departments of Labor's informal guidance. So this piece of guidance is really aimed at you, the employer, and it gives you steps that you should be taking to help you meet your fiduciary duties when it comes to prudently selecting a service provider for your retirement plan. And it's not just Union Bank, but if you've got a payroll provider that's helping out, or if you've got an investment advisor to the plan, you want to apply these same type of standards to those other service providers. So the first thing that the Department of Labor thinks is very important is employers should want to know and require that the service provider uses a third-party auditor to review and validate the service provider's cybersecurity practices. And indeed, on an annual basis, Union Bank has an independent third-party auditor that conducts a SOC 2 examination of Union Bank. And what the SOC 2 does in a very broad discussion is, first of all, that SOC 2 examination looks at Union Bank's systems to make sure that they're protected against unauthorized access and unauthorized disclosure of information. Next, the SOC 2 examination looks at Union Bank's systems processing, make sure that that processing is complete, valid, and timely. The SOC 2 looks to make sure that Union Bank is adequately protecting confidential information, including participant personal identifiable information. And then finally, the SOC 2 examination looks to make sure that Union Bank is properly collecting personal information, properly using it, retaining it, disclosing it, and then disposing of it when necessary. So that's the SOC 2 examination, again, reviewed by an independent third-party CPA firm. The next thing that the Department of Labor wants to see with respect to an employer hiring a service provider, that there's specific provisions in services agreement between service providers like Union Bank and the employer. So for those of you who have your pre-approved 401k plan with Union Bank, you know that we're just wrapping up our every 6 years amendment and restatement. And what we're turning to now is updating our services agreement to incorporate this Department of Labor guidance in this tips for hiring a service provider, so you can look for a revised services agreement by the end of the year. So a couple of the things that are going to be new in your revised services agreement is that Union Bank is going to be required contractually in our new agreement to let you have access upon request the results of those cybersecurity audit results. Also, the revised services agreement is going to talk about the various types of insurance coverage, types of coverage and policy amounts in the updated services agreement. Toward the bottom of the screen, the Department of Labor wants to see contract language about complying with privacy information security laws. Union Bank has already got that in your current services agreement, as well as prohibition on using private information and disclosing it without the employer's provider. Some new things that you can look for in the revised services agreement. There is going to be information about notifying the employer in the case of a cybersecurity breach. So, for example, if there has been a breach and it affects your plan, the revised services agreement is going to require Union Bank to notify you about the breach, explain the nature of the breach, the confidential information that was subject to the breach, what action Union Bank has taken or will take to mitigate the impact of the breach, and then finally what action Union Bank has taken or will take to prevent a future similar breach. So again, by the end of the year, you should see the revised services agreement that is being restated to incorporate this Department of Labor guidance on tips for hiring a service provider. The next piece of Department of Labor guidance was cybersecurity program best practices. And while the tips for hiring a service provider was aimed at employers, steps they should take in hiring a service provider, the cybersecurity program best practices is targeted at service providers such as Union Bank or your payroll provider. So again, we'll just hit some of the high points here. First of all, Department of Labor wants the service provider to develop a formal cybersecurity program. As I mentioned at the end of my presentation, Dana's going to talk about Union Bank's cybersecurity program. The service provider, and Union Bank does this, should be conducting annual risk assessments, looking at business recovery practices and updating risk assessment procedures at least annually. Union Bank does that. And then again, the important this annual third-party audit of security roles and responsibilities. We talked about the SOC 2 examination that happens on an annual basis. Well, Union Bank also has an annual SOC 1 examination, and that SOC 1 is reporting on Union Bank's internal control over financial reporting. The next best practice is that a service provider should have strong access control procedures. And when we're talking about strong access control procedures, what we're really talking about is that if Union Bank is talking to someone, that we know that that person is who they say they are, and that we're providing appropriate access in other contexts to Union Bank's IT systems from the client. So here, access privileges is a big thing. The Department of Labor wants to make sure that access privileges are reviewed at least every 3 months, and that they're based on a need to access basis. Not everyone should have access to this private participant data. Indeed, Union Bank complies with these access privileges standards that the Department of Labor wants to see. Department of Labor also wants to see that there's multi-factor authentication, especially when there's an external network is accessing Union Bank's internal network. So for example, if someone's working from home, there needs to be multi-factor authentication to be able to log into Union Bank's system. And then finally, very important, and there's been litigation on this, especially recently with respect to making distributions to participants, that whenever a participant makes a distribution election, after that election is made, Union Bank reaches out to the participant that we know is the participant and confirms indeed that they requested a distribution, and we confirm that the identity of the authorized recipient of those funds. And then the last point on this slide, the Department of Labor wants to know that service providers also work with other vendors. And the Department of Labor thinks it's important that whenever you're working with another vendor, so that's Union Bank's vendor, that we are conducting annual security reviews and making independent security assessments with respect to our vendors, and we're doing that as well. The service provider should also conduct annual cybersecurity awareness training, and Union Bank does that. There should also be, with your service provider, a business resiliency program. And that business resiliency program should address business continuity, disaster recovery, and incident response. Again, Dana's going to talk a bit at the end of a presentation about Union Bank's practices. Data should be encrypted as it goes between Union Bank and you, the employer. Over the last couple of years, there's been a much greater adoption on the part of our employers to making sure that census data and the like is transmitted to Union Bank in a secure fashion. There should also be strong technical controls implementing best security practices. And here, what we're really talking about is keeping hardware and software up to date, routinely backing up data, as well as updating antivirus software. It's the SOC 2 examination that looks at areas like this. And again, Dana will talk about Union Bank's cybersecurity program in a little more detail. And then again, there needs to be responsiveness to cybersecurity incidents or breaches on the part of the service provider. And as I mentioned, the updated services agreement will require Union Bank to notify you, the employer client, of any breaches and such. So that's the second piece of guidance. The presentation I've got here is a little different than what was sent out to you yesterday afternoon. I decided to flow a little better to discuss right here. The third and final piece of the Department of Labor's informal guidance, and this is real short, is that this is really aimed at participants and beneficiaries to steps that they can take to reduce the risk of fraud. And what I would recommend is that you share this document with your employees and perhaps share it on an annual basis. So if the Department of Labor ever audits the plan and conducts this cybersecurity audit and says, what have you been doing about cybersecurity? Well, this is one thing that you can say you did. Well, I periodically remind our participants that they need to do things like monitor their account on a regular basis, using strong passwords, closing unused account, keeping personal contact information current. There has been litigation in the past that, a participant might have moved 3 or 4 times and never updated the service provider or the former employer or current employer that, hey, I've moved. So it's important that your participants and employees keep their personal contact and address information current. And of course, we're aware of things like be aware of free Wi-Fi and be aware of phishing attacks and such like that, and keep hardware and software current. So we've taken a look where we think the Department of Labor is going, and that's going to be issue some sort of formal guidance on the heels of the informal guidance. We talked about what the Department of Labor has done, and that is last year they did issue those 3 pieces of informal guidance. Well, now the issue is, what is the Department of Labor doing today? And it only took about 60 days after that April release of the informal cybersecurity guidance that the Department of Labor started auditing against that guidance. And if you take a look at what happens is the Department of Labor notifies the employer, hey, we're coming in to do an audit. Well, we've got access, some of the lawyers and such and employers have shared what the Department of Labor is asking for, and it's an unbelievably broad document request for everything you've got on paper relating to policies and procedures and guidelines and access controls with respect to cybersecurity issues. Now, you should note that there is no current ERISA requirement that an employer develop cybersecurity policies and procedures. Nonetheless, the Department of Labor is asking for those cybersecurity policies and procedures. And one way to show the Department of Labor that you're taking cybersecurity seriously and you're being prudent when you're operating your plan is to show them some policies and procedures. And we'll talk about maybe where you can go to develop something like that if you haven't done so already. But just to let you know what the Department of Labor is doing right now, it is a broad net over everything, all things cybersecurity. They want to know what type of cybersecurity awareness training that you've been doing, what sort of awareness training your service provider is doing. The Department of Labor wants to understand where participant data is being held. Where does it reside on your system? Who has access to that data? What type of cybersecurity breaches have there been? Show us how those, what kind of response was made and what actions are going to be taken to prevent future cybersecurity breaches. What kind of data are you sharing with your service providers, union bank, payroll provider, an investment advisor, or anybody else? And any type of documents that the employer has received from their service providers relating to cybersecurity capabilities. Well, here, just attending this webinar, you're starting to comply with this last component, is that we're going to have a services agreement that addresses a bunch of cybersecurity issues. You've got literally this presentation that you're attending to get serious about cybersecurity, and we've attached documents, and as I said, we're going to discuss here in a couple of minutes Union Bank's cybersecurity practices. So kind of let me give you an example of how you should be thinking of cybersecurity in the very simple task of hiring a new employee. And when you think about it, obviously, if you're hiring a new employee, you're going to have personal identifiable information about that new employee. You're going to have date of birth information. You're going to have date of hire information. You're going to have address, contact information, social security numbers, etc. So what the Department of Labor wants to know from you on these cybersecurity audits is, how are you, the employer, protecting this personal private information? They're going to ask you questions like, what happens to this information? So you take this information down. Then what do you do with it? Who has access to this information? How does someone access this information? Do you have this private information in a filing cabinet that anybody can get into? Or is it in a filing cabinet that has a key that only one person has the key to? Does this private personal information reside on your computer systems? If so, can anybody get to it? Limit those access privileges to only those folks that need to have access to that. And how do they get onto the system? Hopefully it's password protected. The Department of Labor wants to know also, where does this new hire paperwork go? Do you provide it to Union Bank? Do you provide it to a payroll provider? Do you provide it to anybody else? The idea here is that the Department of Labor wants to know, and if they come into your shop, they want to know that you're protecting this participant data as part of your fiduciary duties relating to operating a retirement plan. So the key point here is that you need to know what data you have, how it's being controlled, and how it's being used, and how it's being accessed. Similarly, when an employee becomes a participant in the plan, you want to kind of take a look at your payroll provider, make sure everything's buttoned up there. How are your participants enrolling in the plan? Is it being done on paper, or are they enrolling online? We recommend for security purposes, if you can, to get away from paper and actually have your participants enroll in the retirement plan online. With data, of course, the Department of Labor wants to know how census data is being relayed back and forth between you, the employer, and Union Bank. Is it encrypted? And then secure portals. Union Bank's plan sponsor web and participant websites are secure portals. So the point is that right now the Department of Labor is auditing against its informal guidance. And so if you haven't already done so, I think it makes sense to at least put together some sort of cybersecurity plan that's appropriate for your business. And what I mean by that is, if you're a manufacturer with 10 employees, your cybersecurity plan should look a whole lot different than if you were Fidelity or Vanguard with their cybersecurity plans. And so, again, it's really kind of understanding where the data is going and how it's protected. You could look for a consulting firm to help you develop a cybersecurity plan. There's templates on the internet. And then when I did some Googling for this presentation, I saw that the Principal Insurance Company had a nice little data sample template that would be a really good starting point. And so if you Googled a data security prudent process template, you'd eventually get to a document that kind of gives you a framework or a skeleton of what a cybersecurity procedure could look like, and it provides prompts for you on some things that you should be thinking about in the cyber security world. So that's the end of my presentation. I just wanted to let you know again what the Department of Labor has been doing or has done in the cybersecurity arena, what the Department of Labor is currently doing in this area, as well as some thoughts on where I think the Department of Labor is going to go. And frankly, it's going to be sooner or later, I think, some sort of formal guidance and taking a look at the SEC proposed regulations, because could serve as a starting point with that. So that's the end of my portion of the presentation, and I'll turn it over to Dana, who will talk a little bit more detail about Union Bank's cybersecurity practices.
Well, thank you, John, and good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Dana Turner. I'm the Network Security Officer here at Union Bank. I've been here for about 30 years, and I lead our cyber response team here at the bank, which includes also our incident response team from a technical perspective. What I'd like to do this morning is briefly cover in a couple of slides going over our information security overview memo that you were all provided to talk about some of our information security controls that we have there. Follow that up with a little more in-depth review of the particular layers, some of the technical defenses that we have in place, and then finish it up talking a little bit about our disaster recovery plan and some of the capabilities that Union Bank specifically has there. So in relation to our information security overview, oversight is provided by not only our board of directors, our auditors, the state of Nebraska, the FDIC. We do go through several additional audits that are provided throughout the year. We have seems like about once a quarter we have different audit groups that are going in. The nice thing is they're all really looking about the same controls, just from a different perspective. So when I talk about some of the controls that we have in place specifically, you can be rest assured that we're having these reviewed and validated on an ongoing basis throughout the year. Next slide, please. All right, specifically physical security, this is something that the bank has improved our capabilities over the last couple of years. We've gone gotten away from key access in a lot of our facilities to badge access. So that's something with badges and readers, we're able to make changes to physical access very rapidly. So when it comes to terminating employees or changing somebody's physical access rights, we can do that on the fly. Several years ago, when we were relying primarily on keys, it would be very hard to try to make sure that we, if we needed to rekey a lock for whatever reason, it was very problematic. So several years ago, Union Bank made a strategic plan to start going to more of a digital locking system to protect all of our buildings. One of the other things that we do is that all of our facilities are actually locked. So we have at our branches, we actually have badge access even for our customers, where they have to be keyed in, or they can actually use one of their Union Bank associated cards to get into the facilities there. All of our other non-customer related areas are locked 24 hours a day and do require badge access to get into those facilities as well. When we start taking a look at information technology policy in general, we have not only our policy for information technologies, we have a policy for information security. We also have, supporting those two policies, are programs, the IT program and information security program, which go through and outline more specifically the different controls that we have in place for both of those. So those cover, if you want to start taking a look at some of the technical details, firewalls, detection monitoring systems, filtering devices, management systems, and how the data we maintain is protected, transmitted, and handled with care. Now, at least annually, we do go through all of our policies and all of our programs and revise them. Obviously, there are Lots of changes going on in this space. We were recently looking at some guidance from the FDIC that regarding certain positions within the bank, and this guidance was actually written in 2015, so about 7 years ago, and just the amount of technology that has actually changed in that 7 years is incredible. So this is something that we pride ourselves in, that, you know, at least annually we're reviewing these policies, but we're actually updating these on a continuous basis throughout the year, because there are certain changes that come up, especially with encryption technologies, with other defensive capabilities that come along, that we want to make sure that we're evaluating and actually get the best of breed, if you will, into production inside of our network environments here at Union Bank. All right, next slide, please. Okay, training. So as John was going through the Department of Labor's recommendations for what to look in from a service provider standpoint, training is one of the things that we pride ourselves in. Union Bank has always had a culture of security, and it doesn't just happen in IT, it happens in all of our business units throughout the bank. And that's because of our training program. We go through annual information security training and regular information security and cybersecurity awareness campaigns. We do periodic testing of those security awareness campaigns. We try to, at least on a quarterly basis, send out 2 phishing tests to our employees. We also do clean desk testing, shred bin testing, and some other testing throughout the year, just to make sure that people are complying with our information security and cybersecurity policies. Vulnerability assessments are another thing that we really pride ourselves in. We go through at least annually, sometimes more than once a year, is a full network penetration testing and vulnerability assessment of our network. Now, the vulnerability assessments, we run those on a monthly basis against all of our systems. All of that information is used to determine which systems need to have patches applied to them as they come out from our software vendors in order of criticality, and to make sure that all of our systems are kept up to date, they're protected as they should be, and that we're managing the vulnerabilities that get found in these various systems on an ongoing basis. As far as our security assessments that we go through and penetration tests, again, those are done on an annual basis. In some cases, they're done more frequently. We do hire third-party firms to come in and actually perform those security assessments and penetration tests against all of our devices. So not only from an external standpoint, but also an internal standpoint as well. We have application penetration testing that goes on. So all of our customer-facing applications that we have, we don't do on an annual basis, but we will go through from a risk perspective, figure out which are the higher risk applications that our customers are using, and we'll focus on those. And so again, that's something that we do on an annual basis. Third-party risk management. This is another area that I think we do very, very well in, and our examiners from the different agencies would agree. This is the process that we have in place for onboarding. It's really the cradle to grave of handling of new vendors, and not only our vendors, but our vendors' vendors. So we'll go through and review as new vendors are onboarded. We'll go through and do our due diligence. We'll review their SOC reports, any other cybersecurity reports that are available about these new vendors, to get an idea of if it's a new relationship. We want to have a very good idea of who we're dealing with, the type of security practices that company has, and not just them, but their vendors as well. We do go through and risk rank our vendors that we deal with from a critical to a standard level. And depending on their criticality, we will review those vendors on a more frequent basis. Our critical vendors are reviewed on an annual basis. Important vendors are reviewed at least once every 2 years. Now, in a lot of cases, we do go through and do some ad hoc reporting on all of our vendors. We use some we use vendor monitoring systems that will actually score our vendors for us, and we get ongoing reports about issues that pop up with the service providers and the vendors that we use. All right, next slide, please. Okay, I don't want to get into too much detail, but I thought that this would be a very good representation of the multiple layers of security that we have employed here at Union Bank. I know this slide is very busy, but it gives you a pretty good idea. We like to call this our gobstopper diagram. If everybody's familiar with what gobstoppers are, it's a little hard-shelled candy that you keep going through the shells until you get to the semi-soft center. So if we take a look at this, from our perimeter security, we have multiple items in deployed, going from denial of service protection, perimeter firewalls, perimeter IDS and IPS, that stands for intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems, multi-factor authentication on multiple systems, secured demilitarized zones. So this would be those places where it's outside of our internal network and just inside of our internet connections, messaging security, so anti-phishing, anti-malware, safe links, so links that come in through emails that are coming to our employees are actually reviewed to make sure that all of those links are safe and not going off to malicious sites, data loss prevention, access control lists. Again, go down through the layers, network security, things that we're doing that make us stand out from other service providers. Behavioral anomaly detection. This is something where we're taking a look and taking a look at not only our users, but systems. What is normal for those systems? What, when it comes to a user, what are their normal login hours? Are they badging in at odd times? So from an information security perspective, a lot of that information becomes very important in trying to determine the risk that certain users or certain systems pose. As far as vendor access, one of the things that we do a little differently than most is we actually silo all of our vendors. We only give them access to the items that they need in containers that only contain their particular product. And it's very tightly controlled. We do not allow them to move around within the systems. They, again, really only have access to things that they need to have access to, and that's kind of an overarching theme with the Department of Labor's guidance on this, making sure that you're only giving access to people people based on the specific role that they have. Endpoint security. Again, we're using user behavioral analytics, process control monitoring, patch management, limiting local admin access. This is something that you should all take a look at inside of your networks, making sure that your end users don't have the ability just to install software, that there is some type of change management process that you go through inside of your organizations to make sure that only approved software is actually being installed on your systems. We start getting down into application security. We do dynamic application testing. So this is real-time scanning of code for applications that are being written to make sure that our developers are using proper coding procedures. We do data flow detections, web application firewalls. What those do is another layer that provides a more in-depth review of the traffic that's going on inside of sessions to make sure that there's nothing malicious happening inside of those connections. Data security, data drive encryption, data integrity monitoring, containerization, tokenization. This is a new practice where we're obfuscating the data and using without the proper keys or the proper tokens to decipher that, the data is actually useless. And again, all of those go down to protecting critical assets that we have. And then the supporting sides that we have are policy management, which cover IT security governance, security policies and programs, cyber threat intelligence, security architecture and design, risk management, security awareness training. And then on the operations side, we have performance monitoring, vulnerability assessments, digital forensics, supply chain monitoring, again, vendor monitoring, incident reporting, detection and response, and SIM. This is what SIM is a log aggregator that takes all of our security logs throughout the bank and does analysis on those and provides alerts based off of activity. So again, using that behavioral analytics, not only on systems but users. All right, next slide, please. Okay, real quickly, just to talk about our business recovery plan. Our technology stack here at Union Bank is highly virtualized. Our goal is to return to normal operation levels as quickly as possible following emergency or business interruption or disaster. We go through and we test various systems throughout the year. It's not just a once a year, at least a couple of times a month. There are different systems that are being tested, and this isn't just from IT. These are different business units that are going through and testing their disaster recovery plans. We, as a bank, we do go through on an annual basis and do an all bank business recovery tabletop exercise. From an IT perspective, we actually participate in several national level exercises, either through FSISAC, or we recently participated in a cyber range event with the Nebraska National Guard and several other critical infrastructure partners here in Nebraska. Our board of directors direct business recovery policies and procedures. Our technology center, again, virtual servers. We have disk-to-disk backup, so we're not relying on tape. And some of the issues that come with magnetic storage. Our SAN, this is something that we just recently upgraded to improve not only security, but also the speed of transactions that we're able to do. The penetration, intrusion, and detection systems that we have in place are also key, especially from a recovery plan standpoint. Our disaster recovery site is 100% mock-up of what we have in production, meaning that the same devices that we have in our production data center, we have those exact same devices in our disaster recovery site. So we have 100% processing capability if we were ever to move over into a disaster situation. And then again, third-party risk management. We've gone through and identified which critical vendors are higher risk, and we increase the frequency and the robustness of the reviews of those vendors on an annual, or in some cases a couple times a year, going through and even getting down to doing site visits for some of those vendors. All right, tried to run through that fairly quickly. So I guess I'll turn it back over to John and Jason, and we'll have you guys take it from there.
Thank you, Dana. At this point, that concludes our prepared remarks. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, if you're more comfortable with asking questions offline, again, you can contact me at john.nownes@ubt.com. But for now, does anybody have any questions for Dana or me?